180 billion rand circulates through the informal township economy every single year, yet the very communities generating this vast wealth find themselves economically dispossessed on their own doorsteps. For over a decade, Julius Malema declared that liberation lay exclusively in seizing the commanding heights of the economy, the commercial banks, the platinum mines, and the land. But today, an unexpected electoral campaign in Matatiele reveals a startling pivot as his party mobilizes around a 500 million rand government fund for local grocery shops. How does a movement that once dismissed neighborhood commerce as trivial suddenly position itself at the center of grassroots survival? Stay with us. This is not merely a political dispute. It is a profound test of constitutional promises and economic survival. If this inquiry into systemic power speaks to your conviction, take a moment to like this analysis, share your perspective below, and subscribe to South African Dynamics to stand with independent investigation. Beyond the fiery parliamentary debates and revolutionary slogans, the daily struggle for bread and sovereignty is reshaping the political landscape. Across every province, working-class families are demanding clarity, fairness, and institutional honesty. The battle for the township counter has formally begun. In the rural expanse of Matatiele in the Eastern Cape, a political campaign poster recently emerged that has sent shockwaves through the South African political landscape. Printed in bold red and emblazoned with the distinctive emblem of the economic freedom fighters, the notice extended a direct invitation to local business owners. It urged all South African operators of neighborhood grocery stores to contact their regional mayoral candidate and Member of Parliament for direct assistance in securing licenses and accessing the state's 500 million rand development fund. At first glance, such an initiative might appear to be routine constituency work, a standard intervention by an opposition party seeking to assist marginalized entrepreneurs. Yet within the complex and turbulent arena of South African politics, this local campaign represents a staggering ideological reversal that cuts to the very core of party credibility. To comprehend the profound dissonance of this moment, one must revisit the fiery declarations that have defined the political identity of Julius Malema for over 13 years. On public stages from Soweto to Polokwane, the commander-in-chief of the Red Berets consistently projected a vision of radical structural transformation. When grassroots movements and township residents took to the streets to protest their economic marginalization, demanding that retail trade in the townships be reclaimed by indigenous citizens, the response from the national leadership was dismissive and uncompromising. Julius Malema publicly characterized these community struggles over neighborhood shops as petty distractions. He argued with characteristic force that true liberation would not be found in the aisles of corner stores, but in the nationalization of the commanding heights, the platinum and gold mines, the private commercial banks, and the vast tracts of agricultural land. The rhetoric was grand, historic, and uncompromising. Yet the economic reality of the informal trading sector tells a vastly different story. Known across the nation as South Africa Spaza shops, these micro-retail enterprises are not mere incidental businesses. They constitute the vibrant lifeblood of township survival. Generating an estimated annual turnover exceeding 180 billion rand, this informal network supplies basic foodstuffs and household necessities to more than 60% of the country's population. For millions of ordinary families living in the shadow of chronic unemployment, these small storefronts represent the only barrier between modest sustenance and absolute destitution. When Julius Malema South Africa observers analyze this grassroots economy, they see an ecosystem where every single rand represents blood, sweat, and community resilience. To dismiss this multi-billion rand sector as trivial was an egregious misreading of grassroots pain. Now faced with shifting voter sentiments and the harsh realities of electoral arithmetic, the narrative has abruptly transformed. The sudden enthusiasm of the party leadership to facilitate access to the 500 million rand enterprise fund reveals how easily ideological purism can bend when local influence is at stake. Political strategists understand that whoever controls access to government resources wields immense leverage over community structures. In the fierce contest for the seat of power, the allocation of state capital becomes an intoxicating instrument of patronage and mobilization. By inserting themselves between vulnerable shopkeepers and bureaucratic institutions, political actors attempt to reassert relevance in communities that have grown weary of unfulfilled promises and distant revolutionary theatre. This abrupt transition from nationalizing corporate mining conglomerates to administering township commerce exposes a profound structural paradox. For years, the political establishment treated informal traders as an afterthought, an inconvenient detail in a broader geopolitical narrative. Now, as local elections draw near, these very same traders are courted with bureaucratic paperwork and promises of financial salvation. But this sudden embrace of local commerce is not unfolding in a peaceful vacuum. It is taking place against a backdrop of escalating community tension, unmonitored supply chains, and tragic human loss. Did this unexpected pivot arise from a genuine awakening to grassroots hardship, or was it triggered by an explosive breakdown of law and order that the political elite could no longer afford to ignore? The simmering discontent across South Africa's urban peripheries finally reached a devastating breaking point in the industrial township of Katlehong. What began as quiet murmurs of community frustration rapidly escalated into full-scale public defiance following the violent abduction of a local South African shopkeeper. For days, furious residents barricaded arterial roads, brought municipal transport to an abrupt standstill, and shuttered commercial activity across the township, demanding the immediate release of their neighbor. The atmosphere was thick with palpable outrage, an explosion of collective grief, fueled not merely by a single kidnapping, but by months of unaddressed grievances regarding violent intimidation, economic displacement, and the tragic deaths of young children who had consumed contaminated foodstuffs traced back to unregulated wholesale distribution networks. These were not theoretical debates held in air-conditioned legislative chambers. These were mothers and fathers burying their children grieving in township alleyways where the rule of law appeared to have completely vanished. Yet as community outrage spilled into the streets of Katlehong, the reaction emanating from the upper echelons of political leadership struck an astonishingly dissonant chord. Rather than acknowledging the acute security vacuum and offering solidarity to terrorized families, prominent opposition voices and high-ranking party figures took to digital platforms to cast doubt on the reality of the crisis. In statements that shocked community organizers, party communicators suggested that the abducted shopkeeper had orchestrated his own disappearance, dismissing the legitimate panic of the community as manufactured hysteria. On social media forums, party loyalists traded dismissive commentary, refusing to confront the documented presence of armed syndicates operating within the informal economy. For working-class citizens who had spent years supporting liberation movements, this cold indifference represented a profound moral betrayal. The very leaders who claimed to champion the poor were now questioning their suffering in order to protect their own ideological convenience. This stark confrontation between grassroots trauma and elite denial exposed the timeless conflict of justice versus power. When ordinary citizens are terrorized in their own neighborhoods, they do not seek patronizing political lectures or philosophical treatises on continental solidarity. They demand basic civic protection and the equal enforcement of municipal bylaws. The community in Katlehong did not mobilize because of xenophobic hostility. They mobilized because their fundamental human dignity had been repeatedly violated by a culture of institutional neglect. They demanded a standard of governance that refuses to bow to illicit capital or political expediency. Their collective cry across the barricades was unmistakable: not reform, not rhetoric accountability. The broader Julius Malema Spaza narrative, once carefully curated to project an image of revolutionary detachment, began to collapse under the weight of these ground-level realities. Political analysts observed that the party could no longer sustain its posture of dismissing local commercial disputes while simultaneously claiming to be the authentic voice of the dispossessed. When township shopkeepers are murdered in cold blood, and community defenders are forced to risk their lives to secure the release of their peers, the ideological posturing of national leaders rings hollow. The grief of Katlehong demonstrated that the informal economy is not an academic case study, it is a fiercely contested battleground where human lives and generational savings are directly on the line. As public anger intensified and demands for transparency reached the steps of Parliament, the controversy shifted from street demonstrations to the highest corridors of fiscal authority. When blood has been spilled on unprotected streets, the question is no longer whether the state will intervene, but who truly holds the keys to the public purse. The informal township trading economy is no longer a peripheral commercial footnote. It represents an expansive socio-economic ecosystem circulating more than 180 billion rand annually. Yet beneath this bustling daily trade lies a severe administrative vacuum and a profound crisis of municipal governance. Millions of South African households confronted with national unemployment rates exceeding 32% rely entirely on the daily liquidity generated across neighborhood counters to sustain their families. When public resources, specifically the state's 500 million rand micro-enterprise support fund administered through the Department of Small Business Development, are deployed to stabilize this fragile sector, the administrative framework instantly becomes a contested battleground for political patronage. The distribution of state capital in economically distressed townships is never purely technical. It is inherently fraught with ideological rivalry, regulatory confusion, and structural vulnerability. The Department of Small Business Development, under the political leadership of Minister Stella Ndabeni-Abrahams, has faced relentless scrutiny from civic watchdog organizations, industry associations, and parliamentary oversight committees regarding the verification mechanisms governing public disbursements. Investigations and formal inquiries associated with the Office of the Public Protector have repeatedly underscored the paramount necessity of ensuring that public funds are directed exclusively to lawful verified enterprises rather than leaking into opaque commercial syndicates. When public revenue is dispersed without rigorous administrative transparency, public confidence in constitutional governance suffers immediate damage. The underlying principle remains immutable. Every single rand allocated from the national treasury is funded by the relentless labor of taxpayers who rightly demand absolute statutory compliance and rigorous institutional oversight. Yet all too often legitimate regulatory processes are obscured within the shadow of inter-party negotiations and administrative inertia. Pause with us for a moment and tell us in the comments where you are watching from, whether you are joining us from across the United States, across the African continent, or from the broader global diaspora. South African Dynamics would like to express our deepest gratitude to every one of you, and we send our most heartfelt wish across the distance. May your journey be accompanied by steadfast dignity, enduring strength, and unwavering light. Let the comment section below serve as an open forum of international fellowship, bridging continents through our shared commitment to historical truth and democratic accountability. Against this turbulent institutional backdrop, the launch of the EFF Spaza campaign represents a consequential repositioning of parliamentary opposition strategy. By attempting to insert party representatives and members of parliament as indispensable intermediaries between local shopkeepers and state funding applications, political actors seek to construct dependable grassroots networks in contested voting districts. This operational shift exposes the stark contradictions embedded within contemporary populist movements. Whilst national platforms continue to broadcast uncompromising rhetoric, demanding the wholesale nationalization of heavy industries, local functionaries are pragmatically maneuvering to secure direct oversight over micro-enterprise grants. This tactical pivot reflects the profound political anxieties confronting traditional opposition parties in an increasingly fragmented political landscape, where historical slogans alone can no longer guarantee the unconditional loyalty of struggling communities. The ultimate consequence of this political entanglement is the gradual erosion of civic self-determination. When commercial viability becomes tethered to political affiliation rather than regulatory adherence and entrepreneurial initiative, the fundamental principles of fairness and economic justice are severely compromised. Township traders find themselves suspended between urgent economic survival and partisan manipulation, compelled to navigate bureaucratic labyrinths controlled by political gatekeepers. Yet as domestic tensions deepen over the administration of local livelihoods, the reverberations of this crisis have begun to attract international scrutiny. When statutory enforcement, constitutional mandates, and basic survival collide within the informal sector, how do foreign observers, multilateral institutions, and global superpowers evaluate South Africa's struggle for institutional stability? The deepening domestic turbulence surrounding South Africa's micro-retail sector has steadily transcended national boundaries, capturing the close attention of regional bodies, international financial institutions, and foreign diplomatic missions. Across the African continent, institutions such as the African Union and the Southern African Development Community view the escalating municipal friction through the critical prism of cross-border trade, regional stability, and diplomatic reciprocity. When commercial disputes within informal settlements escalate into violent confrontations, the diplomatic ramifications ripple directly into bilateral relations between Pretoria and partner nations whose citizens have established extensive commercial footprints across Southern Africa. Continental stability depends fundamentally upon the predictability of trade and the absolute protection of human security under established international law. From the vantage point of Western capitals, particularly Washington, the broader Spaza shop scandal is scrutinized not merely as an isolated neighborhood trading dispute, but as an acute indicator of structural economic distress. Multilateral institutions, including the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, have consistently highlighted South Africa's severe structural unemployment, persisting stubbornly above 32%, as a primary catalyst for civil unrest and social volatility. When informal economic sectors which generate hundreds of billions of rand become heavily politicized by competing parliamentary factions, international risk analysts take note. For foreign observers, sovereign creditors, and development partners, the integrity of local supply chains, public health standards, and municipal regulatory enforcement serve as direct barometers of institutional resilience. If governing bodies fail to maintain uniform administrative standards across local markets, foreign investment assessments and bilateral trade dialogues invariably reflect that heightened systemic risk. Within international diplomatic and legal forums, this ongoing crisis highlights the severe friction between sovereign regulatory mandates and universal constitutional protections. Global legal observers emphasize that state intervention must remain rigorously grounded in administrative fairness rather than populist improvisation. When municipal authorities and security agencies execute emergency crackdowns in response to public outrage, the international community observes whether such measures represent genuine structural reform or merely reactive administrative coercion. In the assessment of independent governance monitors, lawful authority cannot be reduced to performative political displays. Not law, not justice enforcement. This fundamental clash brings into sharp focus the enduring dilemma of accountability versus impunity. When governance structures falter at the municipal level, leaving vulnerable communities and foreign entrepreneurs alike exposed to criminal extortion, the legitimacy of constitutional oversight is severely tested. The international community watches with profound concern as South Africa attempts to navigate this delicate balance between safeguarding local livelihoods and honoring its international treaty commitments. Yet as external diplomatic pressures mount and domestic frustrations reach fever pitch, a decisive question emerges. How will South Africa construct a sustainable economic architecture that restores local dignity without tearing apart its constitutional fabric? The path forward for South Africa's township economy cannot be paved with short-term political expedients or superficial municipal gestures. What the current crisis reveals with piercing clarity is that genuine economic liberation requires systemic structural reform rather than selective financial patronage. Across the nation, a profound transformation in civic consciousness is taking root. Township entrepreneurs, community organizers, and working-class families are increasingly recognizing that their economic survival must not remain hostage to election cycles or partisan posturing. The demand resonating from rural regions like Matatiele to industrial townships like Katlehong is unequivocal. Communities are demanding genuine ownership, transparent regulation, and uncompromised public safety. They are asserting their right to participate fully and fairly in an economy that has for too long relegated them to the periphery of national prosperity. Rebuilding this vital commercial ecosystem demands more than emergency task forces or the opportunistic disbursement of state funds. It requires a coherent national strategy that seamlessly bridges grassroots entrepreneurship with comprehensive industrial supply chains. Local shopkeepers must be equipped with modern commercial infrastructure, unhindered access to competitive wholesale distribution networks, and institutional capital that operates completely free from bureaucratic extortion and partisan gatekeeping. True economic sovereignty is not achieved through fiery parliamentary declamations or theatrical rhetoric. It is meticulously constructed counter by counter, enterprise by enterprise, and community by community. When ordinary citizens are afforded the structural security to build enduring generational wealth, the entire foundation of the constitutional republic is fortified against political manipulation. Before we arrive at our final verdict, let us pause to reflect on the immense weight of what is at stake. The enduring struggle for economic sovereignty and human dignity across Southern Africa is not a distant, abstract headline. It is the living, breathing journey of a resilient people determined to reclaim their collective destiny. If this rigorous analysis resonates with your profound belief in historical truth, constitutional clarity, and systemic justice, subscribe to South African Dynamics today. Your subscription is far more than a simple metric. It represents an active commitment to elevating independent analysis and ensuring that these crucial global perspectives receive the dignified platform they deserve. As South Africa navigates this critical crossroads, the fundamental relationship between the governing elite and the working majority faces its ultimate historical test. The era of passive compliance has passed, replaced by an awakened electorate that demands unyielding transparency and tangible structural change. What final verdict must be rendered on a political establishment that promises total transformation whilst compromising on the everyday survival of its people? What unfolded across the rural expanse of Matatiele and the turbulent industrial alleyways of Katlehong is far more than an isolated dispute over municipal licensing or informal trading rights. It stands as a profound moment of institutional reckoning for post-apartheid governance. The strategic political mobilization surrounding the EFF Spaza campaign demonstrates how swiftly revolutionary posturing can pivot toward transactional electoral calculation whenever public resources become accessible. For more than a decade, sweeping promises of seizing the commanding heights of heavy industry captivated the national imagination. Yet the daily survival of millions has always resided upon the modest counters of neighborhood corner shops. The wider repercussions of the Spaza shop scandal have laid bare the fragile foundation of the township economy, exposing the deep structural fissures between sovereign constitutional duty and populist administrative convenience. When working-class families are left entirely to their own devices to defend their community livelihoods against violence, illicit syndicates, and municipal neglect, constitutional commitments to human dignity and economic justice are placed directly on trial. The unfolding EFF Spaza campaign serves as a vital reminder that true economic liberation cannot be delivered through selective party patronage or opportunistic state grants. It requires relentless institutional accountability, lawful governance, and the uncompromising protection of the hard-working citizens who sustain the nation's lifeblood from the ground up. Ultimately, the foundational question confronting Southern Africa resonates far beyond party manifestos and parliamentary podiums. If power changes hands but not structure, has anything really changed? As ordinary citizens awaken with unprecedented clarity, demanding tangible sovereignty over performative rhetoric, the moral trajectory of the nation hangs in the balance. Thank you for walking this investigative journey with South African dynamics. Share your perspective in the comments below. Subscribe to stand with independent analysis, and join us as we continue to document the unfolding truth.